The therapist who will end up f***ing his clients. While we may imagine this individual being a sinister, depraved creature who has entered into the field for the sole purpose of exploiting his vulnerable patients, seducing them, and then using them to get his sexual fill, you'll also find that, like any good villain, most therapists who end up having sex with their clients have a deeper, more complex explanation to their origin story. Let me explain. Meet John. He's a therapist, and he's currently going through a season of struggle. He's lonely, horny, isolated, has an unfulfilled sex life, and on top of all this, has his own set of problems he needs to handle. But unfortunately for him, he has no one he's able to turn to that's able to meet his needs. But that's all about to change. His last session of the day knocks on his office door. It's Becky, a patient that the therapist has been working with for some time now. She's an attractive woman, but struggles with a low self-esteem that causes her to see sex as a commodity to be used in her relationships, leading her to believe that the only real gift of worth she has to offer in a relationship is a sexual one. This resulted in her depending on sex in her past relationships, in hopes that it would prevent her partners from losing interest in her, ultimately leading them to abandon her. This has led her to bring those same relationship dynamics into therapy. Throughout therapy, in an effort to avoid her therapist from losing interest in her, she has attempted to seduce her therapist countless of times. Just look at how she ended her last session.
I want you.
She's a little on the nose and lacks the subtle tact to seduce someone covertly. The point is, the therapist is aware of all this, and in his current lonely, isolated state, will use it to his advantage. The therapist, in a state of mind that can be best described as narcissistically primitive, has fully lost sight of his client's needs and can only think about satiating his own lusty carnal desires, numbing his own anxieties, and manipulating his position of overpowering influence and trust to coerce and objectify his patients. Becky is vulnerable, she's insecure, and she's in the palm of her therapist's hands. He sees his opportunity and takes it. So, in our last session, you said you wanted me. I think there's something I can do about that. And in a trance driven by his own lustful carnal desires, the therapist has abandoned his duty to act in a way devoted towards his client's well-being and has become another addition in a long line of men that have objectified her body, betrayed her trust, and used her as a tool for his own gratification. Now let's see the aftermath of his decisions and see how things have panned out. The deed is done, and regret starts to settle in as you realize there was no real long-term plan after you had sex with your patient. You can't marry this person, have kids, or even grow old together in a loving relationship, because you having sex or having any kind of relationship outside of therapy goes against your profession's code of ethics. And if found out, you would lose everything you worked so hard to achieve. You'd lose your license.
No! No! No!
You'd be sued for malpractice, and you'd become a pariah in the therapeutic community and lose the profession you love doing. But worst of all is the effect that sex has on your relationship with your client. Therapists who have had sex with their clients always end up regretting it, realizing you were caught up in a moment of lustful passion and are no longer a prisoner of your primal urges. You suddenly snap back to reality and regret your sinful decision. But instead of atoning for your sins, you enter into a state of self-preservation and start to distance yourself from your client. And your client will realize this, and then it will finally hit them. They will start to realize that the therapist's caring was only a tool he used to unlock access to what he ultimately wanted, the sweet nectar in between their legs. The therapist's concern, support, caring for her, calling her attractive, and picking up her late-night phone calls had all been subtle manipulation.
All right, slow it down.
A means to an end that would shape her into a tool he could use for his own gratification down the road and not for her benefit. A therapist who has sex with his clients denotes deceit, manipulation, and objectification of his patients. Basically almost anything but actual, genuine caring and relatedness. And because of this, eventually your client will feel more used than cared for. And the result of this is a client who no longer knows what or whom to trust, as the therapist has become another addition to our long history of people that betrayed and eventually abandoned her after getting out of her what they desired. And as a result of feeling these intense emotions of exploitation, betrayal, and abandonment, your patient is at an increased risk of taking matters into their own hands and may turn to alternate, more harmful ways of dealing with their own pain and turning their intense emotions inward in a way to get back at you while also escaping their suffering at the same time.
Jesus Christ!
Moral of the story: therapists, please don't fuck your clients.